And we are also going.
Okay.
Okay, good morning. So welcome to this special edition of the life of Maimonides. And the reason we are doing this today is because we just completed the annual study of Maimonides. So we're going to discuss what does that mean, the annual study. There are thousands of people that study Maimonides every single day. It was an initiative that the Rebbe started in 1984 to study the works of his teachings, and the Rebbe divided it in different cycles that anybody on any level has the ability to study. And we're going to analyze who Maimonides was, what is this study of his text, why is it so popular, why is it so critical, why is it so important. We're going to show you some fascinating slides of manuscripts, actual copies of manuscripts that are at the Oxford University, of the original manuscripts from 11th, 12th century. Some interesting videos that the JLI put together. So let's begin with who Maimonides was. I'm going to mute everyone.
I can't hear you.
Oh,
you muted yourself.
Yeah, I think I muted myself. Can I hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, okay. But I'll start again. So the life of Maimonides was born in the year 1135 in Cordoba, Spain, passed away in 1204 in Cairo, was buried actually in Tiberias in Israel. You can go visit his gravesite. Who Maimonides was, we're going to discuss this now. So here is actually a picture of his tombstone in Tveria, in Tiberias. It's very easy to find if you ever go to Tiberias. Many people visit his gravesite. And what's interesting is why was his name Maimonides? Anybody know why his name was Maimonides? Anybody want to take a guess? I guess everyone's on mute. All right, so the name Maimonides is because his name was Moshe ben Maimon. His father was Maimon, so hence the name in Maimonides. In Hebrew, his name was Rambam, and Rambam is an acronym of the R, the Resh is for Rabbi, Mem is for Moshe, the Bet is for Ben, and the final Mem is for Maimon. It's an acronym of his name, Moshe ben Maimon. So what's very interesting on his tombstone, which is right over here, is an inscription on top. And it says as follows: Mimoshe ad Moshe lo kam kemoshe. From Moshe, the original Moshe, until Moshe, no one aroused like Moshe. Why did he get that title? To get such a title that there was no one like Moshe, from the original Moshe, like Maimonides, let's see what makes him so unique. So, as I said, many schools, you've probably heard of the hospital in Brooklyn, Maimonides Hospital. There are many schools named Maimonides. My children go to school in the Chabad of Fort Myers, and then the name of the school is Maimonides Hebrew Day School. And as you can see, different slogans. Maimonides Hospital in Brooklyn. You have the Harambam Healthcare Campus in Haifa, which is the main hospital in Haifa, and etc. There are currencies in Israel, stamps, and if you look, Maimonides, who lived in the who lived almost 1,000 years ago, is probably one of the most famous, if not the most famous Jewish scholar that ever lived in the Jewish world and in the non-Jewish world. I think we can say Rashi perhaps was an equal famously, but if you ask a Gentile if they ever heard of Rashi, chances are that less people know about Rashi versus Maimonides. What's unique about Maimonides, we're going to show you a video clip that he wasn't only a rabbi and a scholar, but he was a doctor, he was a physician, and hence we have all the hospitals named after him, and primarily he was a businessman. Let's watch this video of the biography of Maimonides. Okay, learn how to share. 1 second.
In the spring of 1138, Jews in the southern Spanish city of Cordoba were preparing for Passover, the festival of deliverance. But the household of the esteemed rabbinical judge of Cordoba, Rabbi Maimon, was celebrating a delivery of another kind.
Hold on.
In the spring of 1138, Jews in the southern Spanish city of Cordoba were preparing for Passover, the festival of deliverance.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm trying to fix it quick.
Shy of Passover, the rabbi and his wife.
Okay, now it looks like it's working. Can you see it?
In the spring of 1138, Jews in the southern Spanish city of Cordoba were preparing for Passover, the festival of deliverance. But the household of the esteemed rabbinical judge of Cordoba, Rabbi Maimon, was celebrating a delivery of another kind. Just 1 day shy of Passover, the rabbi and his wife welcomed their eldest son, whom they named Moshe, Hebrew for Moses. Little did the rabbi know that he was destined to gain eternal fame through Moshe, for his brilliant child grew into the universally acclaimed scholar known as Moses Maimonides, or Moshe, the son of Maimon. It was a trying time for the Jews of Spain. The Almohads, a fanatical Islamic movement bent on establishing a caliphate, were gradually overrunning the Iberian Peninsula. Countless Jews were murdered. Others were forced to convert, while many families fled Spain. Maimonides was 10 years of age when his family was forced to flee. They settled in Fez, Morocco, where his brilliant father shaped him into a Talmudic scholar of repute.
He also mastered what we call chokhmah, which is the universal wisdom of humankind. He knew the works of Aristotle and Plato and the Islamic interpreters and so on.
Maimonides also became an expert in astronomy and medicine. In 1165, the family journeyed to the land of Israel, but unable to settle, they continued to the large Jewish community of Cairo, where Maimonides married and settled down. He then devoted a complete decade, approximately from 1168 to 1177, to producing his crowning literary achievement, the Mishnah Torah.
He was an Ish Halacha. He was the greatest rabbi of the Middle Ages. He wrote the greatest law code in all of Jewish history, the Mishnah Torah. He was an absolutely outstanding master halachist.
For the first time since God gave the Torah at Sinai, the entire body of Jewish law would be codified in a systemic, clear, and concise fashion. The 14-volume masterpiece created a powerful impression across the Jewish world. Then, in 1177, tragedy struck. Maimonides' brother, David, drowned when his ship, fully laden with merchandise, sunk in the Indian Ocean. The brothers had shared a deep bond, and Maimonides grieved terribly for years. David had also been Maimonides' business partner, and this calamity meant financial ruination for Maimonides, who was now forced to become a doctor. His expertise soon caught the attention of the Egyptian ruler Sultan Saladin, who appointed Maimonides to the position of royal physician. Maimonides also served as the leader of Egyptian Jewry. He juggled his time between his royal duties, treating private patients, serving as a statesman for the Jewish community, teaching Torah, and discussing medicine, philosophy, and science with his non-Jewish audiences. Maimonides described his schedule in a letter to a dear student, Rabbi Samuel ibn Taban of Provence.
I live in Fostat, and the Sultan lives in Cairo. I must see him every morning to check on his health. As a rule, I am in Cairo early each day, and even if nothing unusual happens, by the time I get back to Fostat, half the day is gone. When I come home, my foyer is always full of people, Jews and non-Jews, important people and not, judges and policemen. I apologize and ask that they should be kind enough to give me a few minutes to eat. That is the only meal I take in 24 hours. Patients go in and out until nightfall. And sometimes, I swear to you by the Torah, it is 2 hours into the night before they are all gone. I talk to them and prescribe for them, even while lying down on my back from exhaustion. On Shabbat, the whole congregation, or at least the majority of it, comes to my house after morning services, and I instruct the members of the community as to what they should do during the entire week. We learn together in a week fashion until the afternoon. This is my schedule.
His quill hardly saw any rest either. Jewish communities from distant lands sought his advice and rulings on Jewish law, and Maimonides felt compelled to pen yet another literary masterpiece to forestall a developing crisis in Jewish faith. Many Jewish scholars in the Arabic lands had been swept up in the newfound Islamic obsession with Greek philosophy. This left some Jewish scholars deeply disturbed by the apparent intellectual contradictions between contemporary Greco-Islamic philosophy and various precepts of the Torah. In 1191, Maimonides published a treatise that thoroughly addressed these issues from a philosophical standpoint under the title Guide for the Perplexed. When Maimonides passed away in 1204, the entire Jewish world mourned his passing. An epitaph without historical parallel was carved into his gravestone, proclaiming that since the days of Moses, no Jewish leader's achievements had rivaled that of Moses Maimonides.
Okay. Can you hear me? Okay, great. So that was a beautiful biography of Maimonides. And let's now discuss a little bit about his the actual study, the work that he done, just to how much to appreciate that he was a very busy man, to say the least, as he describes himself, plus being a doctor and a businessman, and still yet to write all the writings that he did is remarkable. Back here, all right. So there are a few famous books of Maimonides, works. Typically, I would say there are four main works. The first one is called the Guide to the Perplexed, which is called in Hebrew Moireh Nevuchim, which deals mostly with philosophical questions of universe and God. Difficult book to study, not an easy one. A more popular book is the commentary on the Mishnah called Piruch HaMishnah. And here's an actual copy of a picture of an original manuscript that was written in Spain 1190. And if those who can read Hebrew, you can see over here, it says here Perek Shlishi, which is the third chapter. The most famous of all the books of Maimonides is what's called Mishneh Torah. Mishneh Torah has 14 volumes where he covers the entire Torah, all the 613 mitzvot. And here you can see a copy of an early print, and you see here Mishneh Torah, and he gave it a subtitle called Hayat HaChazaka. What is Yad? Yad means the hand. Hayat HaChazaka. Chazak means strong. It is the strong hand. It is the strong hand. This is my contribution, where I taught the 613 commandments in detail and in a very beautiful writing, as we're going to elaborate soon. What's interesting is why did he call it with the subtitle of Yad Chazaka? Because the Hebrew word Yad over here is Yud and Dalet, and the numeric value of Yud is 10 and Dalet is 4, which is 14, and he wrote 14 volumes. Similar to this book, but a much concise way, in much shorter way, is another work, and that is called the Sefer HaMitzvot. Before here it says, just give you an idea, how long did it take for Maimonides to write the Mishneh Torah? 10 years. And this work was completed around the year 1180. The Mishneh Torah was written in Hebrew, and the reason it's not all the books, which is also unique about Maimonides, were written in Hebrew. Most 99.9% of Jewish scholars always wrote in Hebrew, with the exception the Talmud, which is written in the Aramaic language, which is similar to the Hebrew language. However, Maimonides, being that he lived in Cairo, has written books in Aramaic, in Arabic. I believe that the Choves HaLevavot, the Guide for the Perplexed, was written originally in the Arabic language. Actually, as a bar mitzvah gift, I received from the rabbi in Morocco, who was a family member of mine. He translated the book of Tanya in Arabic. And he gave me a copy of that, a treasure that. Interesting to have the Arabic and the Hebrew next to each other. But Maimonides wrote the book in a different language. So Mishneh Torah begins as follows. So give you an idea, what is the purpose? What is the teaching of the Mishneh Torah? So here we're going to put on the screen the introduction to the book. And it's important to understand in order to appreciate what the book is about and how each of us have the ability to study it. So this is how it begins. The mitzvot given to Moshe at Mount Sinai were all given together with their explanations. Moshe, our teacher, personally transcribed the entire Torah before he died. He did not, however, transcribe the explanation of the Torah. Instead, he commanded it verbally to the elders to Joshua and the totality of Israel, as it says in Deuteronomy 31, be careful to observe everything that I prescribe to you. For this reason, it is called the oral law. All of you, many of you know from all the classes that we know that we have the oral Torah, we have the written Torah. The The written Torah are the 5 books of Moses that Moshe wrote right before he died. God dictated him all the words. I know there was a debate the other week in Harif's class. When did he write the Torah? Here Maimonides takes a stand that he wrote it right before he died. So, but what did he write? He wrote the written Torah, not the explanation to the Torah, which we call the oral Torah. Maimonides felt the importance to explain the oral Torah, and specifically to be in a very organized fashion that anybody on any level of study can study it, as we're going to see further. And he continues here that this is the oral law is the explanation of the mitzvah given by God. The laws are deduced by the sages, and as he continues here, and which really goes back to the Mishnah. All right, let's backtrack for a moment. Maimonides lived in the 10th, 11th century, 12th century, right? The Torah was given 3,300 years ago. So about in the year 1500 year before the Common Era. The Jews were living in Israel with the 2 temples for approximately 1500 years until the destruction of the second temple in the year 70. At that time, it was the first time that their sages at the time, under the leadership of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yehuda, decided to write down the oral Torah with the composition of the Mishnah. What is the Mishnah? Let's watch a short video, what the Mishnah is. And then we see what did Maimonides come to add 1,000 years later in the year 1180 when he wrote the Mishnah Torah. Now, many of you, before we start, know that famously the Mishnah, and the Mishnah continues with the Talmud. What is the Talmud and the Mishnah so famous for in addition to the laws? And that is, there's always a debate. Every law is debated, meaning there's always 2 opinions. Rabbi Akiva says this, Rabbi Yehuda says this, Hillel says it is permitted, and Shammai says it is forbidden. And there is almost never a concise, clear code. What is the law? So if there's 2 opinions, who do you follow? Because there were so many arguments throughout the Talmud and the Mishnah, it was never it took for a student, took a lot of energy and work and study to figure out how do I follow the law. Until Maimonides, there was no clear word. And this is really what Maimonides comes to. But first, let's watch what the Mishnah came to teach. Okay.
The 5 books of Moses, known as the written Torah, was accompanied by an oral tradition passed down from teacher to pupil for over 1,000 years. During this time, these ideas were not formally committed to writing, and in fact, it was prohibited to do so. The intention was for students to learn directly from teachers and to accept personal responsibility for preserving the teachings for the next generation. Yet toward the end of the 2nd century, the oral Torah was recorded in a book known as the Mishnah. Why did this happen? And who had the audacity to change the status quo? Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi was head of the Sanhedrin. His piety, Torah scholarship, and wisdom earned him the name Rabbeinu HaKadosh, our holy teacher. It was he who made the momentous decision to record the oral law. The situation of the Jews was precarious. The might of the Roman Empire had spread its tentacles and ruled over the Jewish people in Israel. Around 100 years previously, the Romans had destroyed the Second Temple. Countless Jews were killed, forced into exile, and sold into slavery. Similar atrocities occurred a few decades later, when the Romans crushed the Bar Kokhba rebellion. At certain points, the study of Torah was forbidden on pain of death. Religious practices were banned, and Torah sages were murdered. An oral method of transmission has advantages, but it can only flourish when people are living together in peace, with a strong presence of scholars and teachers. However, under the circumstances of oppression and dispersion that existed at the time, an oral means of transmission was not advantageous, as it jeopardized the accurate preservation of these treasured teachings. Considering these realities, Rabbi Yehuda made the bold decision to record the oral Torah. Indeed, over the next 2,000 years, the Jewish people often experienced great suffering, dispersions, and weakening of scholarship. Were it not for Rabbi Yehuda's revolutionary vision in writing down the Mishnah, many sacred teachings and practices would have been lost forever.
Okay, so this was a short synopsis of what the Mishnah is about. Now he continues that after the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda, who wrote the oral Torah down. Now the oral Torah is not a word by word teaching; it is the explanation of the written. As we have taught many times, you cannot understand the written without the oral explanation. So, for example, in the Torah it says you should wear tefillin every morning, but doesn't tell us how the tefillin should be made. Doesn't tell us that they have to be black boxes with 4 compartments and what has to be written. It says you should put a mezuzah on your door, and it doesn't say exactly how do you write a mezuzah. And almost all of the 613 commandments cannot be understood without the oral explanation that was given from generation to generation, from Moshe till the end of the Second Temple period, when Rabbi Yehuda understood that because Jews will be dispersed, and importantly, as we mentioned, the oral Torah was not allowed to be written down up until the Mishnah, when Rabbi Yehuda started to write it down. And continue here in text 2, Rav Ashi, who lived about 300 years after Rabbi Yehuda, composed the Babylonian Talmud in Babylonia, because after the destruction, many Jews went into Babylonia, many Jews remained in Israel. So really, we have 2 Talmuds. We have the Babylonian Talmud in Babylonia, approximately 100 years after Rabbi Yochanan composed the Jerusalem Talmud. The intent of both is to elucidate the words of the Mishnah, to explain its deeper points, and to relate the new teachings that were developed by each court from the era of Rabbi Yehuda until the composition of the Talmud. The Talmud style, this is all the introduction by Maimonides as he explains why he wrote the Mishnah Torah. He writes here in text 3, the Talmud style, complex. Sorry. I think I forgot to share. I'm reading, I'm not sharing. Hold on. Okay, I apologize. Now you can see the screen. Okay. Here text 3, the Talmud style is quite complex and is composed in Aramaic, which is a mixture of other languages. This language was understood at the time by the people living in Babylonia. The Talmud was the explanation of the Mishnah. The Mishnah was written in very short fashion. For example, the Mishnah of the tractate of Sukkot begins, how do you build the sukkah? How tall does the sukkah have to be? One rabbi says this, one rabbi says that. Moving on. It doesn't explain the rationale and the support of the scriptural support by the sages. The Talmud was the time when the sages sat together in their study halls and debated the Mishnah. So basically, the Talmud is a transcribe of what the conversation was. So the language was understood. I'm continuing reading here in text 3. The language was understood at the time by the people living in Babylonia. In other places ever, and even in Babylonia itself today, This language is not comprehensible unless one has studied it. There are only a select few who comprehend the Jerusalem Babylonian Talmud and the other works of Midrash. They require a breadth of knowledge, spirit of wisdom, and much time in order to truly learn from them the many laws of the Torah. It's very difficult to study Talmud if you're not familiar with the language, and especially of the people at that time, how they comprehend the language. Maimonides writes. And he continues the text forward. Therefore, look how he writes, with a deep trust in God, I girded my loins. I, Moses, the son of Maimon of Spain, I contemplated all these texts and thought to compose a work that would summarize their conclusions regarding all matters of Torah law in clear and concise terms. In this way, the entire oral law could be organized for everyone without complication to those of lesser stature and those of greater stature. Therefore, I have called this text Mishnah Torah, meaning second to the Torah. For a person could study the written Torah and then this text and thereby comprehend the entire Torah without having to study any other text. It takes a lot of guts to write, to take of the Talmud, to write that I am writing a text that will be second to the Torah, meaning that you can go from the written Torah and then study my work, the Mishnah Torah, and understand the entire Torah without anything else. But by the way, it doesn't mean that you should not study the Talmud. He himself says a person is required to study Talmud. A third of his study should be of Talmud. However, what made it so special, in my opinion, as I'm studying Talmud, the Maimonides, for the past 25, 30 years in this cycle, that there is no other work in Jewish literature that is so organized, written in such clear Hebrew, in such an easy way to Maimonides literally teaches to the most advanced learner, to the beginner, as we're gonna bring a few examples. Now, you got to ask the question, what is it exactly that he comes to teach? What does it mean, the law? So we all know there are 613 commandments. But before we go to the 613 commandments, let me show you here a copy, this is really neat, a copy of one of the original manuscripts. And you can see this is in the Oxford Library. It's a copy of the beginning chapter. The text we just read is in this manuscript. Here is a copy of the original manuscript written by his name was Shlomo something his name was, but he made. And here you can see in the beautiful color how it says, Kol ha-mitzvot. All of the mitzvot are explained in this book. If you have extra money, by the way, there is a page of Maimonides for sale at Sotheby's. Before I show you that copy, here is there was a rabbi who came and hand wrote a copy from the original during the lifetime of Maimonides. And because there were many mistakes and errors as people made copies, this is in Oxford University, this copy here. He came and showed it to Maimonides, and Maimonides, in his famous handwriting here on the bottom, it says, I actually edited this copy, this handwritten copy, and I am giving my full endorsement. And if you can look in the bottom, let's see if they actually, here you go. It says on the bottom, Huga, Huga, which means it's edited, Mesifri, from my original book, Ani, I am, Moshe Berabi Maimon Zal. Moshe, the son of Maimon. This is the famous writing. So this actually is in Oxford University. But there was a rabbi by the name of Lazar, son of Prachia, who took the entire Maimonides and made a solid copy. And he writes here in text 5, it should in its entirety be placed, meaning it was so important that it should be placed in keeping of the Bezdin, which is the Jewish court forever, that is not to be sold or redeemed, nor should any single person ever take possession of it. It should rather be kept available so that all scholars can correct their own version against it, but not read from it irregular or copy from it. Rather, anyone wishing to correct his version to borrow the volume he needs from the Bezdin, leaving a bond against its value with the Bezdin until he corrects his own book and returns it. Kind of interesting. There were different the codex there were different codex that they wrote for the 5 books of Torah that were similar. Were so corrected that they needed the original copy that everybody can lean on this original. Especially when we talk about Torah law, every word is critical. That if there's a written error, it can lead to many mistakes. This is the actual copy that is for sale on Sotheby's. So they're estimated between $150,000 and $200,000. If you have some extra geld and you want to buy this, go to Sotheby's. Enjoy. All right. This is that concludes the idea of Mishnah Torah. Aside from this, on the side of this work of Mishnah Torah, he wrote another book, and the book that probably will be more applicable to our students here, and that book is called Sefer HaMitzvot, which is the book of the mitzvot. What is the book of mitzvot? It is the condensed version of the 14 volume, which really in one book, which takes all of the 613 mitzvot and writes it in a brief paragraph explaining the mitzvah. But let me show you. Here is a print, a much later print. You see here it's printed in Warsaw in the year 1870. And he writes here as follows. Rabbi Simlai taught. Rabbi Simlai, he quotes from the Talmud. There were 613 mitzvot stated to Moses, consisting of 365 prohibitions, corresponding to the number of days in the solar year, and 248 positive mitzvot, corresponding to the number of a person lives. Now, nowhere in the Torah does it say that there are 613 mitzvot. There's no place. However, there are hints in the Torah that allude to the number 613. Rabbi Simlai, who was a Talmudic sage, says 613, you have 365 negative commandments and 248 positive commandments, corresponding to the solar year and corresponding to 248 limbs. The problem is, how do you decide what is a mitzvah and what is not a mitzvah if you read the written Torah? Remember, the mitzvot, the commandments, had to be directly instructed by God to Moses and by extension to the Jewish people. But if you read Torah, how do you know what is a commandment? Every time God says, I command you, is it a commandment? Let me just give you an example. Avona said, what is this verse that alludes to this? It is written, Moshe commanded to us the Torah, an inheritance of the congregation of Jacob. This is a very famous line in Deuteronomy 33:4 that Moshe commanded to us the Torah as an inheritance. So the word Torah, in its numerical value, the gematria, is 611. 2 commandments were heard directly from God at Sinai, and the remaining 611 were taught to us by Moshe, equaling 613. We all know that the Jews were standing at Sinai, they got the 10 commandments. However, they only heard directly from God the first 2. They couldn't take that energy, and they begged Moshe that he should continue because they can no longer take the powerful voice of God. But the first 2 commandments, which is the positive commandments, I am the Lord, and the second commandment, do not worship any other idols, which is the foundation of all of the positive commandments and all of the negative commandments, they're heard from God. When Moshe writes in the end of Torah that Moshe commanded to us the Torah, so the numeric value, Torah 611, they heard from Moshe the 611 commandments. From God, they heard the extra 2, hence we have 613. In other words, whenever God spoke to Moshe in the commandment, let's say the commandment to say the Shema, or to put on a mezuzah on your door, or to keep Shabbat, God did not speak to the Jews directly. God spoke to Moshe. Moshe then conveyed the words of God to the Jewish people. All right, so here's for those who know Hebrew, the word Torah. Tov is 400, Vav is 6, Reish 200, and Hey is 5 equals 611. Let me give you an example and how it's very complex to figure out what is a mitzvah, and not only what is a mitzvah, how many mitzvot are there when God gives us a instruction. So here's an example out of the book of Numbers 2:2. The children of Israel shall encamp, each man by his division, with the flag staffs of their father's house, some distance from the tent of meeting, they shall encamp. This is a clear commandment to whom? To the Jewish people when they were traveling in the desert. So let me ask you, is this a mitzvah? Is this one of the 613 mitzvahs? And the answer is no, because this was written clearly to the people who were at the time were traveling. All of the mitzvahs were given not with a time limit, although we have many mitzvahs that are only limited in Israel as the temple stands, but clearly this was not a mitzvah that was included in the count. Nobody wrote the count of the 613 mitzvahs primarily until Maimonides came around. And this is what brings us to this whole amazing project of studying this work of the Sefer HaMitzvah. Let me give you another example. Speak to the entire congregation of the children of Israel and say to them, you shall be holy. This is a clear commandment. What is the commandment? You shall be holy. Now, is this a mitzvah? Of course, everyone's going to say, of course, it's a mitzvah, right? Mitzvah, you shall be holy. Well, Maimonides, based on the Talmud, says this is not considered one of the 630 commandments. It really is an instruction that a Jew should always be in a state of holiness, but it's not counted as one of the counting of the 630 mitzvahs. As you can see just from these two examples, us reading the written Torah doesn't give us indication what is considered a mitzvah, what is not considered a mitzvah. I'm going to skip this one. I'm going to do the second one on the bottom. Everyone knows that on Sukkot we take out we shake the 4 different kinds of plants, the lulav, the etrog, the hadassim, right? The original commandment is as follows, in Leviticus 23:4. You should take for yourself on the first day the fruit of the hadar tree, which is the etrog, the date palm of front, which is the lulav, a branch of the braided tree, and willow of the brook, which is the hadassim and the rova. So how many different kinds should I take on the first day of Sukkot? 4 different types. So the question is now, as a student of Torah, is this 1 mitzvah or 4 mitzvot? And that's where the Talmud and the Old Torah explains it. And you have to go dig into the Talmud, figure out is it 1 mitzvah or is it 4 mitzvah? You can ask, what's the difference? That's not for today, but there could be many differences if it's considered 1 mitzvah or 4 mitzvah, especially in temple times if somebody violated a mitzvah or missed a mitzvah, they had to bring a sacrifice. So if somebody forgot to shake the lulav and etrog on Sukkot, how many sacrifices do they have to bring? They have to bring 1 or they have to bring 4. And the answer to this particular question is 1 mitzvah. It's 1, not 4 mitzvahs. And this is here a beautiful copy on print, and how Maimonides, when he wrote the Mishnah Torah and laid on the Sefer Mitzvot, before writing the explanation, he would always start with a header. And in the header, he would say exactly how many mitzvahs are there in this category. So here is a mitzvah of fasting. This is the laws of Yom Kippur. And he says on Yom Kippur, there are 4 mitzvot. It says over in Hebrew. Yesh b'chlalon abba mitzvot. We find there's 4 commandments in Yom Kippur, which are 2 shtei mitzvot asay, 2 positive commandments, v'shtei mitzvos lo asay, and 2 negative commandments. And they are v'zeh pratam, and these are the details. You see, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Not to rest from work is 1. Not to rest from work, and then not to do any work. So to rest from work is the positive commandment. You have to rest, like Shabbat, which is a positive mitzvah. Refraining from work is a negative commandment. Number 3, you have to fast. Number 4, not to eat and not to drink. So you see, within fasting, this is a classic example. Within fasting and Kippur, everyone thinks it's 1 mitzvah. It's really 2 mitzvahs. There's the positive and there's a negative. Positive means you have to fast. Negative means thou shalt not eat or drink on Yom Kippur. And again, I can ask you, why do I need 2? But just to give you an idea, when you say 613, it sounds like a big number. But out of 613, fasting is really 2 mitzvahs. So again, it gives us such a basic, great understanding of the mitzvot of the Torah. I'll move on. So basically in 1984, the Rebbe initiated the study of Maimonides, and he made it as a campaign that everybody should study the Talmud, no matter, it says women, men, women, children, religious, not religious, everybody. He encouraged everybody, all Jews, to study the Talmud as a way to, number 1, to unite the Jewish people. Imagine it's happening every day. There are 1,000 people studying the same law, the same page, the same chapter of Maimonides. There's a certain unity that unites the Jewish people. We all study together. You can meet another Jew and discuss what is today's Maimonides, what's today's Harambam. And the Rebbe divided it in 3 different tracks. The tracks are as follows. You can study the Mishnah Torah, 3 chapters a day, and you'll complete the entire 14 volumes of Mishnah Torah in just under a year. We just completed the 39th cycle since 1984, 39th cycle this past Thursday. We just began again, and we're actually, the last few days was the introduction. Today actually is when we start the first real chapter of the Mishnah Torah. The second track is, instead of reading 3 chapters, which is quite extensive, it's a lot to read 3 chapters a day. To read 1 chapter a day, it will take you 3 years to complete the 14 volumes. And the beauty of this year is that every 3 years, the people who are studying the 1-year cycle will meet the people who finished the 3-year cycle. And this is one of the years that we are all finishing together. The 3rd cycle, which is probably the one I would recommend, of course, if you want to spend extra time and study, go for the 1 chapter, even 3 chapters. And that is to study the Sefer HaMitzvos, which is the condensed version. And here you will complete it in 1 year. It should take you 5 to 10 minutes a day that you can study. And I'll show you the end, very easy way how you can study it. I'm going to skip here. The Rebbe spoke very strongly about the amazing idea how the studying Torah unifies people, and it brings us closer to Hashem. It brings us closer to the coming of Mashiach. It refines people when they study Torah. When they study, it helps people in their characters, in their observance, and so on. And the Rebbe also encouraged strongly to always do what's called a Siyum. Whenever you finish a work, a book of the Talmud, a book of the Torah, you should always celebrate. And of course, when you finish the cycle of the study of the Talmud, there should be a celebration. Should get people together, as we're doing here today, for example. So, what's the origin of doing a celebration when you finish a tractate or volume of Torah? So the Talmud says as follows. Abaye, who was one of the great sages, said, "May I receive my reward because when I see a young Torah scholar who has completed a tractate, I make a celebratory feast for the sages." Abaye custom is the source of the universal custom that when a Jew finished studying attractive Talmud, we praise God and publicize that this person merited to achieve this by making a festive meal. Evidence for this custom can be seen in Talmud, where it states that there were no holidays as joyous for the Jews during the temple times as the holiday of Yom Kippur. And you hear that right. The Talmud says there's no holiday as joyous as Yom Kippur. People don't associate Yom Kippur as a joyous holiday, right? It's a serious day. And the 15th of Av. The Talmud comments, Yom Kippur is understandably a very joyous day, but it's a day of atonement. Meaning, it's a day that is a day of atonement, meaning God is going to clean your slate, starting fresh. It is and God forgives your sins after you worked hard. It's a celebration, as you know, in Chabad, we finish Yom Kippur with a dance. We blow the shofar and we dance. And then, of course, we eat the meal. Why the 15th of Av such a special day? And the Talmud goes into a whole debate. What's so unique about the 15th of Av? Anybody heard of the holiday of the 15th of Av? We know about the 9th of Av, which is Tisha B'Av, which is the saddest day of the year, where it marks the destruction of both four temples. So listen to this. The Talmud provides multiple answers until it settles on the answer given by Rabbah and Rabbi Yosef. They both say that the 15th of Av was a day of rejoicing because it was the last day that wood was chopped for the altar. Since they completed a great mitzvah on this day, Jews would rejoice and deem this day a festival. This teaches us that a day on which we conclude the study of a Torah book, is a festival, but there's no greater mitzvah than completing a book of Torah. And this is especially so if one intends to begin a new Torah book shortly thereafter. And here comes the point that when you finish learning a book, you right away begin the next book. You never stop and close the book. Unlike when you finish reading a secular book, you close the book, you put it on the shelf. But as we know, like in Simchas Torah, when we finish the last reading of Simchas Torah, amongst tremendous celebration, what do? We take out the other Torah and we start from the Reshit again within the same hour. We don't wait for the next Shabbat. The joy is a mitzvah not only for the one who concludes the book, but for others as well. This is proven by the fact that the Abai would make a celebration when someone else concluded a tractate, and he would invite many sages to attend. Matter of fact, the Rebbe wanted that the students, Shiva students, should finish a tractate of Talmud during the saddest day of the year. We're gonna begin in another week and a half, the saddest time period of the year, what's called the 9 days of mourning, from the time the temple was burnt, was put on fire, until it until it was completely destroyed. On the 9th of Av, the Rebbe recommended that yeshiva students or anybody who studies should each day, one person should finish a tractate of the Talmud. They can start. They don't have to start within 9 days. And when they do that, everybody should be gathered in shul, even those who did not study, and they should participate because we want to add a dose of joy in days that are marked as mourning. Personally, I'm planning on finishing the tractate of Shabbat on the day before Tisha B'Av, which marks my father's yahrzeit, which is a special blessing for his neshama, that I'm learning a tractate Talmud for his neshama on his day of passing. It happens to be also in a very sad day. And if you want, you can join me maybe via Zoom, and we can celebrate by L'chaim. All right, the Rebbe started in 1984, initiating thousands of Jews from around the world to study at Maimonides. So the first year, 1985, when they finished the first cycle, the Rebbe gave instructions that they should do a Siyum. Siyum means a completion of the book, a celebration in Cairo. In Cairo, even now, and for sure back in the 80s, was not a safe place for Jews or for Israelis for sure to get there. If we have time, and maybe I'll post a link. There's a video clip of that. How did the Rebbe arrange with the Israeli government to do a a celebration of Maimonides in Cairo itself. But let's move. Here's actually a picture. Look at this picture. So many of these rabbis here actually attended my bar mitzvah, which is another story. These are all rabbis out of Israel. This is the Rabbi Hecht out of Elat, which is right at the border to Egypt. This is Rabbi Ashkenazi, Rabbi Yaroslavsky. The others I don't recognize on the picture. Quickly show you the structure of the 14 books. As I said, the books are very organized. So book 1 is the book of knowledge, laws that are basic principles of Judaism, which we're starting today actually. The book of love, laws, he calls them the book of Ava, the book of love. Laws that inspire us in the love for God, such as mezuzah and prayer. The book of times, laws of Shabbat and the holidays that are time, they are time constrained mitzvot. The book of women, laws of marriage and divorce. The book of holiness, laws about forbidden relations and kosher food. Book number 6, books of promises, laws of oath and vows. The book of seeds, which are laws pertain to agriculture. And as you can see, these are very down to earth, easy things that everyone can read and comprehend. The book of service, laws of building the temple and public sacrifices. The number 9, book of sacrifice, laws of sacrifice of the individual. Because all of the 630 commandments are written in Maimonides. Unlike like many other scholars, didn't elaborate on mitzvot, on commandments that are not applicable today. But Maimonides took the approach that even if they're not applicable, a Jew still has the obligation to study all of the 613 commandments. Book of 10, a book of ritual purity, like mikvah. Then you have the book of injuries, laws pertaining to tarts. The book of acquisition, laws on sale and purchase. Book of judgment, laws on civil matters, other than tarts. And the book of judges, laws regarding the courts and monarchy, which is a fascinating book. 14 is one of my favorites, especially the end, which ends with the laws of the coming of Mashiach. So we're going to do that now as part of the Siyum. So this is the last law. Let this be our collective Siyum, a collective completion of Maimonides. As we said earlier, even if you did not study it, you can join me in the completion. On text 9, here, this is for the last law of Mishnah Torah, laws of kings. And the Maimonides writes as follows: in the era of Mashiach, there will be neither famine nor war, neither envy nor rivalry, because what's goodwill will flow in abundance, and all the delights will be freely available as dust. The occupation of the entire world will be solely to know God. In other words, when Mashiach will come, there'll be no famine, no war, there'll be no fights, and all the goods will be available for us, like the dust of the earth. And so what are we going to be busy with? The occupation of the entire world will solely be to know God. Therefore, the Jews will be great sages and know the hidden matters, grasping the knowledge of the Creator and going to the full extent of human potential. As it says in Isaiah, the world will be filled with the knowledge of God as the water covers the ocean bed. Everyone will have an insight and the ability to understand, to know God, to feel God in it, to feel the truth, and the world will be filled with the knowledge of God. And there will be a world of peace, a world of no sickness or no pain, no suffering. And which is what we yearn so strongly. And moving on here, it is appropriate to rejoice when we complete the Torah, and it's customary to immediately begin, as I mentioned earlier, from the very beginning of the Torah. This prevents the persecuting angels from alleging that we have finished with the Torah and do not want to study it anymore. Hence, we make sure that we study. So we just finished Maimonides with the laws of the coming of Mashiach, and we begin with the first text that we're studying today, actually, Maimonides Mishnah Torah, Laws of Foundation Torah, chapter 1, Mishnah 1, the foundation of all foundations. And the pillar of wisdom is to know that there's a primary being, who brings all of existence into being. All the beings of the heavens and earth and what is in between them came into existence only from the truth of his being. Maimonides begins his work with the belief in Hashem, and he says the foundation of all foundations, the pillar of all wisdom is to know that there's a primary being. And if you look carefully, it doesn't say to believe. It doesn't say that it is to believe there's a primary being. It says the foundation is to know. And it's interesting, it's just a play of words. The foundation of all foundations, pillar of wisdom, in Hebrew, is Yesod HaYesodot V'Amut HaChochmut. It's a very poetic way to start a book. But closer look, the acronym, the first letter of each of these four words spells out God's name. You have Yud, you have a Hey, you have Vav, and another Hey. And the idea here is, we emphasizes, it's not enough to believe in God, but actually to know. The idea is to knowing. Knowing means to study about God. And of course, how can we know God? How can we know God? And so the idea really is that faith and knowledge, in this late, is not a contradiction. On the contrary, we need to study everything we know about God, or more importantly, to know what God is not, in order to strengthen our faith in God. A person who studies Torah, who studies all about God, studies the mystical teaching, the written teaching, the halachic teaching, will get a much broader knowledge about God, which strengthens a person's faith versus just having blind faith without ever studying what God is all about. So that is why Maimonides says that the mitzvah is not to believe in God, the mitzvah is actually to know God. So we seek to comprehend, not merely to believe. And he writes in the Sefer Mitzvot, which we're also beginning now, the first mitzvah is that we are commanded about the belief in God, to believe that he is the original cause and source of existence who brings all creations into being. And here he says the word believe, but it goes hand in hand. The mitzvah requires us to investigate as best we can in order to understand about God as much as possible. And then the remainder, once we get to a level what I investigated, but of course there are mysteries I cannot understand, but after I investigated to my best, then because we are discussing the infinite, unknowledgeable God, there will always be something about him and his ways that remains mysterious to us, which is why faith will always be a crucial part of this mitzvah. And to wrap up, so now that you see the brilliance and the beauty of Maimonides, his magnum opus, the Mishnah Torah and the Sefer HaMitzvos, how can you participate in this study? And this is the greatest gift you can give yourself. And it's very simple. Number one, you can write, there's an imprint translation of the Sefer HaMitzvot, 2 volumes. You have the internet, and there's an app by Chabad.org. You can download on your app called the Daily Mitzvah. In there, you'll see the Sefer HaMitzvot, and you can study it. We're just going to the internet to Chabad.org versus to Daily Mitzvahs or Daily Study. You'll find it on the website. I will, God willing, post the links in the WhatsApp group, and those who are not on the WhatsApp group want to join, or send me a text if you need help finding the tools to join the cycle, and try to do it now as we begin. I know that Rabbi Jacobson is actually starting a daily, I think a 5 or 10 minute podcast on the Daily Mitzvah. He's starting any day now, and it will be found under dailyrambam.org. And I will again try to help each of you in this endeavor, should you want to do this. There's also the famous Chayenu magazine, which is an amazing magazine. Many of you have already subscribed to it. You get in the mail. Everything is translated in English and explained. The daily study, the weekly Torah portion, the weekly Tanya portions, the daily Rambam, Maimonides, Sefer HaMitzvot, and many other readings. It's a beautiful magazine that comes out every week, but they'll it's about $100+ a year, and you get it in the mail. I subscribe for myself, and my teenage children use it. Many in the shows use it. It's called Chayenu. They also have an app. Obviously, you can go on the App Store and look for the word Chayenu. All right, I'm going to take quick questions, and if you want, we can also screen the Siyum Harambam in Cairo. So I'm going to unmute quick. I know I spoke for a very long time. I hope it was informative, and if there's any questions, please go ahead. You might have to unmute yourself.
I did.
Yes, Sandy.
Why is Maimonides buried in Tiberias rather than in Egypt?
Good question. There's always been the dream of every Jew to be buried in Israel. For various reasons, but we don't know that right from the beginning. When Jacob passed away in Egypt, right, out of all places, he instructed clearly not to be buried in Egypt and be brought to Israel. There, he was worried about becoming a shrine that people will that the Egyptians will worship his gravesite. Also wanted to be with the Jewish people as he promised. And later on, the 12 sons of Jacob who died in Egypt, primarily Joseph, who was the vice premier of Egypt, made it clear that, and when the Jews will leave Egypt 200 years later, that they should take their remains and they should be buried in Israel. And they schlepped those bones for 40 years in the deserts. And today you can go visit the gravesite of Joseph and the other 12 tribes. So the question is why specifically Tiberias and not Jerusalem? That's another question. But it's not such a far trip from Egypt to and you have to understand the political dynamic
to Israel.
Right? Huh?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, just to personally, my father, for example, who lived in Switzerland, when he was sick, his wishes was that we should take his remains to Israel. He's buried in Jerusalem. Any other questions? Yeah, Bella.
You're
I don't hear you, Bella.
You're muted.
Okay. There are different sources to study. I looked at them yesterday. Some even for JewishWomen.org, they also have that program where you can even find a learning partner and partner with somebody to study. Also choices, 3 choices. There are Rabbi Jacobson, as you said, and there is ourselves. So which one would you suggest works best for us?
You mean, when you say ourselves, you mean to study with each other?
No. For individual to pick up which way to follow, which path.
Which cycle?
No, not each cycle. Like say Rabbi Jacobson or a women's circle, or just on our own go to Chabad.org. You see all the, I actually received an invitation for Chabad.org with all the links to download the application and study.
Well, I give you an example. I started to, as Bella as well, I started to jump into the cycle of the daily Talmud, the page of Talmud.
That's what I'm doing.
It takes 7 years to finish. And I was looking who can motivate me most to challenge or to make sure that it's day in and day out. And with study, everybody has what attracts them. There's not one for all. So if somebody likes to read on their own, study on their own, I recommend to go with have a book, have an actual book, or the Chayenu magazine, or go online if you like to study online and do Chabad.org, which have classes there as well on Chabad.org. Rabbi Josh Gordon gives classes and others.
Exactly, yes.
I would say take a sample of whatever is out there before you decide, and see which one you feel most connected to. It's as simple as that. Ladies want to get together and study with each other. Harif wants to give a class. I don't like to give her more jobs, but but obviously I'm here. I'm very passionate about this, so I'm here to help. I'm here if you have a question, if you want to study, if you insist to study with me one-on-one on Zoom or on every day, maybe I can do that. But there's so many opportunities out there, and really what is amazing is never in history has Torah study been so accessible. And just think about Maimonides when he writes in his introduction why he wrote the Mishnah Torah, and how today think about his neshama in heaven, watching us on Zoom discussing him and studying him. What a tremendous accomplishment that today more people are studying Maimonides than probably during his lifetime. And it goes with Talmud and other stuff. So, which goes together. The last text of the Harambam, where he writes, "What will be going to be busy with when Mashiach comes? With studying of God's knowledge. It means we're going to be studying Torah all day long. We're going to be studying Torah, and the indication, as the Rebbe said, that we are getting closer to the time is because today more Jews are studying Torah or have the accessibility. Right? He said like all the goodies are going to be available like the dust of the earth. That's the text in the Maimonides. The goodies doesn't mean candy. Goodies means the beauty of Torah, the beauty of everything that we appreciate to be accessible. The fact that you can just with one click study God's wisdom is incredible. Our grandparents would go crazy. Imagine that if they hear. Imagine you bring back your great grandparents from 100 years ago, and you show them how you study Torah today. They'll go they go out of their mind. This is what Mashiach was all about when we talk about Mashiach.
I got a question.
Yes, you said.
If I understand correctly, the Mishnah Torah combines both the Mishnayot and the Talmudic arguments or discussions. So it's both the Mishnah and the Talmud. But if that's the case, since each argument has a winner and a loser, why present the loser? Why not just present the winning argument as a description of the rationale behind the Mishnah?
So great question, but the Mishnah Torah, my mind is exactly the opposite. It does not present the argument. It presents the end result, the winner. It doesn't even say who the winner is. It doesn't tell us in the Mishnah that there's a debate between Hillel and Shammai. We are going to follow Shammai's opinion, right? So let's say on Hanukkah there's a debate. Should you light on the first night 1 candle or the first night 8 candles? Hillel says 1, 2, 3, like we do today. And Shammai says, no, the first night 8 candles, second night 7 candles, and you diminish to the last night, you go with 1 candle. Mm-hmm. So my mind is in the laws of Hanukkah would say, the laws of Hanukkah are as follows. The laws is that you have to light your menorah in the evening, 1 candle the first night, 2 candles the second night. You make this blessing, that blessing. That's it, nothing more. It doesn't give us the whole debate. So as the student, reading Maimonides clearly gives you the manual of how to do the mitzvah without getting all the back and forth. It's really beautiful because not only is the Talmud. Now the beauty of the Talmud is you get into the juice of the debate, right? Everybody loves a debate, right? How many millions of people tune in when they watch debates? Because everyone loves a fight, right? So there's nothing more enjoyable than studying Talmud when you have a fight back and forth, and this logic and against that logic, and he brings proof to that. Yesterday I was I was studying the Talmud in Shabbat. Not only are there debates, but sometimes some of the sages come up with the most interesting ideas or stories. So there's a story all about health in Shabbat and about the health benefit of donating blood, in times giving blood, not anything donating blood, but to let blood flow. It was a health benefit. Maimonides says it's very important that when you give blood, after that you have none. But the Talmud, you have to eat. So critical that you have to eat. What happens if you don't have enough food to eat? And it has to be a good meal. Don't ask. So once he says, if you're very poor, you should, if you have only one coin, one pruta, one little coin left, you should go to a store and taste the food and tell them, I want to pay you with this pruta, which is the amount of how much you just ate. I want to take, you take a little bite, and I'm paying you with this little pruta. Probably the store owner is not going to appreciate that, right? And they're going to throw you out of the store because they want to sell you something real. So now go to the other store. Go to 7 stores so you can eat enough that, anyways, just if some of them are like eyebrowing, interesting thing, but it is wild. The Talmud is wild with stories, which is makes a fascinating study. But practically speaking, if you wanted to study the laws and the mitzvot, it can be confusing. What's the end result? Plus, the Talmud can be can be all over the place. It could be one law can be discussed, one part of the law can be discussed in the tract of Shabbat, another can be in the tract of Rosh Hashanah, and you need to be a scholar to put the pieces together. Maimonides did it in a beautiful, I would say, maybe I can give Maimonides the apple of Torah study. The apple is beautiful, put together everything in such an easy order.
So can I say something? So since he was a doctor, everything what he did, he prescribed.
Excellent, good job. Exactly, because he was a doctor. And by the way, in his work, he writes a lot about how to eat healthy. He eats how to sleep, how much to sleep. There's a whole work on Maimonides' medicine, which is fascinating. There's a doctor, there's a doctor today who wrote a whole book on medicine based on Maimonides' works, which is he was way ahead of his years. Think about the mid ages. Any other questions?
So when was the Shulchan Aruch written, and could you differentiate between the two?
Yes. So the Shulchan Aruch, which is the Code of Jewish Law, written by Rabbi Yosef Karo, lived in Europe, came about 300-400 years after Maimonides, like in the 1500s. And the main difference is the Code of Jewish Law is actually, most of the Code of Jewish Law is another step past Maimonides. Most of the work is based on Maimonides, but the Code of Jewish Law is for daily living, only for daily living. It only talks about laws that are applicable today. It doesn't cover all of the 613 mitzvot. It doesn't explain the mitzvot. See, Maimonides did not write the mitzvot for how to conduct each mitzvah only, rather the entire picture of the mitzvah. Where's the source? That's also very important. When it says you should put on tefillin, he quotes, where is it in the written Torah? And he would quote, how many mitzvot, as I give you the example of Yom Kippur, right? And what is a positive mitzvah? What is a negative mitzvah? In the Code of Jewish Law, all it would say, on Yom Kippur, you're not allowed to eat. You're not allowed to drink. What happens if you have to drink because you have to take a medicine or health concerns? You can take a minimum amount under 3 ounces, etc. Go very specific of how to live life in today's day is in the Code of Jewish Law, which is important work. You should read it as well. But it doesn't give you the entire spectrum of the 6 months. That was not its mission. Good question, though. Any other questions? Do you guys want to watch the Siyum in Cairo? Okay, everyone's on lockdown. I see nobody's going anywhere. Okay, it's the beauty of the times. All right, I'll share it. No, that's not. Here it is.
Yisrael Katzever is a senior journalist who covered the Israel Defense Forces for several decades for numerous Israeli newspapers and media channels. Through the years, he consulted and received much advice and guidance from the Rebbe. This interview was filmed as part of the Faithful and Fortified series. Please help us record more testimonies like this one and get involved in the My Encounter with the Rebbe project at 1000encounters.com.
הפכתי במידה מסוימת לשליח להעברת מסרים לקציני צבא בכירים, לאישי ממשל בכירים בישראל, אבל גם למדתי רבות והודרכתי בדרך כיצד לבטא דברים בתחומים שבהם עסקתי, בתחום הביטחוני בעיקר, בתחום האחר במדינת ישראל, כאשר ראיתי ברבי אדם שלא רק הוא משכמו ומעלה, לא רק שהוא אדם שבקי בכל המחמנים ואין לי בכלל מה להיכנס ולומר את הדברים האלה, אבל בתחום הספציפי שלי הייתה לרבי ראייה רחבת טווח, גם ברוחב היריעה, גם לעומק העניינים, וגם הרבה פעמים, כל הפעמים, קדימה ולטווח ארוך. לא פעם כשפגשתי קצינים בכירים, הם אמרו לי, האיש מדהים אותנו. אנחנו לא אנשים דתיים, אבל אנחנו באים אליו, ויש לנו את התחושה שיושב מולנו, איש צבא שעבר כל שנותיו ביחידות, שמכיר את מחשבת המלחמה, שמכיר כלי נשק, שמכיר מהלכים צבאיים, שמבין במודיעין, ורוחב היריעה שלו היה עצום בניתוח של הדברים, וזה גם מה שהביא אליו לא מעט קצינים בכירים. הכרתי 11 פעם במצרים. הרבה מהפעמים האלה היו פגישות גם עם חוסני מובארק. וחוסני מובארק בדרך כלל, היום כבר פחות, כי הוא לא כל כך בריא ולא כל כך עושה את זה, אבל בשנים הראשונות כשהיינו מגיעים עם ראש הממשלה, עם שר הביטחון, עם אחרים, הוא היה לוקח את העיתונאים לאיזה חדר צדדי, יושב איתם, ומפתח שיחה מאוד מעניינת, אישית, חופשית. אני זוכר את אחת מהפגישות האלה, היינו 5-6 עיתונאים, והוא האיץ את השיחה. מאיזושהי סיבה הוא האיץ את השיחה. ולקראת סוף השיחה הוא קורא לי ואומר, אני רוצה שתיכנס אליי לחדר. ואני נכנס לחדר, הוא אומר לי, אני יודע מה אתה כותב, אני יודע מה דעתך, אני שומע אותך בפגישות, יש לי שאלה מיוחדת אליך. אתה יכול להסביר לי מה רוצה הרבי מלובביץ' ממני? נדהמתי. אמרתי לו, למה כבוד הנשיא מתכוון? הוא אומר, הוא מדבר נגד ההסכם איתנו, הוא רואה בנו איום שלא ייפסק גם לעתיד. למה הוא עושה את זה? מה יש לו נגדי? הסברתי לו את הגישה של הרבי. אמרתי לו, הרבי ישמח מאוד אני משוכנע בכך שאם כבוד הנשיא יגיע לארצות הברית, אין לי שום ספק שהרבי ישמח גם להיפגש איתו, ולומר לו את הדברים האלה. אני יכול להסביר רק, וישבנו חצי שעה, והייתה שיחה מאוד מעניינת עם הנשיא מובארק, סביב הנושא של הרבי. מי הרבי? מה גישתו? קצת היסטוריה על חב"ד. מה העמדה? הייתה לו גם את השאלה שכל ישראלים רבים שאלו, אז למה הוא יושב בניו יורק? הבהרתי לו גם את זה. סיפרתי לו על פעילות חב"ד בעולם כולו. זה נכנס אליו לדעתי לראש, אני ראיתי את זה במקום אחד הרבה שנים אחרי זה. קרה כשהרבי אמר לעשות את הסיומים, הייתה תקופה כשהתחילו לעשות את הסיומים של הלימוד של הרמב"ם, אז המארגנים של זה בארץ החליטו שהם הולכים לעשות סיום של הרמב"ם בבית כנסת הרמב"ם בקהיר, בית הכנסת שבימים אלה מושלמת עבודת השחזור והשיקום שלו בצורה יפה מאוד, וחב"ד החליטו לעשות שם את הסיום של הרמב"ם בבית חב"ד, אבל היה חשש בשל השם שיש לחב"ד והדברים שהרבי אמר על מצרים שלא ייתנו להם. שאלו אותי, אתה יכול לדבר עם מישהו? אמרתי, תנו לי, אני אחזור אליכם. דיברתי אז עם השגריר המצרי בישראל, אמרתי לו, חסידי חב"ד רוצים לעשות. אז הוא אמר, מה הם ידברו שם? הפחד היה מה ידברו. אמרתי לו, הם רוצים לעשות סיום של הרמב"ם, זה לימוד, הרמב"ם היה חי במצרים. הוא אומר, על הרמב"ם אתה לא צריך לספר לי, אני יודע רבות על הרמב"ם, אני גר בקהיר, אני מכיר את הרחוב שבו נמצא הבית, ליד השוק הכי מפורסם במצרים, חאן אל חלילי. מה הם רוצים לעשות? אני אעביר את הבקשה. אמרתי לו, אני לא יודע למי אתה הולך לדבר. יש לי בקשה. אם זה יכול לעלות עד לדרג הבכיר ביותר אצלכם, לנשיא, תעלה את זה. לי אין ספק שהנשיא שלכם יאשר את זאת. הוא הבטיח. אני לא יודע עד היום אם הוא דיבר עם הנשיא או לא דיבר עם הנשיא. אחרי יומיים הוא חזר ואמר, דיברתי עם החלונות הבכירים ביותר, אין שום בעיה לחסידי חב"ד לבוא ולעשות את הסיום, והסיום מתקיים, וטיפלו יפה בחסידי חב"ד, וזה רק מראה שדברים ניטעו שם, שגם במצרים וגם במקומות אחרים, המעמד של הרבה היה מעמד איתן, התחשבו בדעתו. הרוחב הגיע למצרים, הגיע לארצות ערביות אחרות, הגיע למקומות אחרים.
All right. It's been a pleasure seeing everyone. There will be a class on Thursday night where we're going to conclude we'll do a Siyum on Pirkei Avot, Ethics of Father. And before anyone, I want to mention also that we are doing I think July 27th, we're doing a joint screening of a documentary called A Rabbi Goes West. It is about a rabbi in Montana who happens to be Chai Rivka's first cousin. We'll open the first Chabad center in the state of Montana. It is a documentary not done by Chabad, done by a secular group. Rabbi Brook in Montana has adopted 5 children, amongst one of them a black Jewish boy, black boy, called him Menachem Mendel after the Rebbe. So it's quite an interesting story. He will give a Zoom presentation after each, everybody can get a link, you can watch the documentary on your own, and then he will come on Zoom and do a question answer on his life in Montana and what it means to to have a family, an Orthodox family with a biracial child. It's fascinating. He's a great guy. He's a fun guy. So just look out for the date. Stanley, what was your question?
The celebration was in Egypt. Were there any Jews in Egypt besides Chabad coming from outside? In other words, are there any Jews now or any kind of Jewish community in Egypt? I know you said that Maimonides.
There has been always
house. He was familiar with Maimonides' house.
There has been a Jewish presence in Egypt for thousands of years.
So there's still a Jewish presence.
I don't know if there's still. Maybe Israel knows because did he travel to Egypt?
I haven't been.
But it's easy to find out. There is no Chabad in Egypt. There's no Chabad house in Egypt. It was more of a Chabad group that went to Egypt at the time. But as you can see, they renovated the synagogues. So obviously, there is either Jewish life or there was Jewish life that they respected. It's interesting that there's a Jewish community in Iran today, ironically, and they are under the protection of the Iranian regime. They respect them. They protect them. They're officially not allowed to show any allegiance to Israel, but there's an Israeli. You can Google this. There's a Jewish community center with a chief rabbi and a synagogue in Tehran. There is also now starting a first Chabad center in the United Emirates, I believe, in Dubai and places like that. So there's so maybe it's a matter of time when Chabad will open up in Egypt. I'm glad I'm in Venice. All right. Anybody else? It's been a pleasure. Mazel tov on the study, and see you around, everyone. All the best. Stay safe. Stay healthy.
Bye, Rabbi. Bye, everybody.